the sort of like positive spiritual references we get are with this visionary actor, you
Well,
know. I mean, it's interesting how these there's a connection, I think, clearly between this actor and the knight.
mm,
You know, the knight is this guy who's seeking God. He's trying to find proof. He wants to see something and know that it's real. And he does see death. And then the actor is this, and he's this really complicated guy. And then the actor is this really totally simple guy who just sees these things and he's not looking for them. And you don't even know like how much he actually kind of like thinks about them or reflects on them, but it just seems to be something that is part of his identity, and this is just part of who he is. And he's almost comfortable with it. And he's just like wide-eyed, this beautiful wide-eyed performance by this actor.
Yeah.
who was a comic in real life.
And
He was a stand.
Oh,
yeah,
really?
yeah, he's a comic. Just to
really?
just to pick
That's
up on
cool.
what you're saying there. One of the things I noticed this time around, it must be my fourth or fifth time watching this film, was that after he's seen the vision of the Virgin Mary, Yoff talks about how there was this stillness. I don't know if he says the word silence, but it seems to be implied that comes over him. And I mean, the theme of this movie is the seventh seal. It references the seventh seal when there's silence in heaven after half an hour after the seal is broken. So it's a film which sort of teeters on the edge of nihilism. It's about silence, although there's earnest seeking. But what I thought interesting in this in this situation is that, you know, there's a kind of stillness and silence which Yoff experiences, which is actually a sign of a very healthy faith. And there's a stillness and silence in the knight's experience, which actually just comes from him just being too clenched up and not receptive enough to what's around him. Whereas
Wow.
Yoff is accidentally so, just instinctively so.
That's really, Yoff mentions it again later when they're in the forest. It's at night, the moon has come out, and they're all it's this kind of ghostly moment when they're all looking up in the sky, and there's this sense of foreboding. And Yoff remarks on the stillness of things. And gee, I wish I could remember. I think it might be the squire who sort of contradicts him somehow. And I think it's the smith who clarifies what he means by the stillness, that there's
I'm totally blanking on what you're talking about.
It's an odd moment because it's not really connected to any specific like plot point. I think it's immediately preceding maybe when we see the
It's the last encounter.
the seminarian die.
Is it either before the seminarian dies, or else it's connected with the sequence where they escape death, Yoff and Mia.
Yes, right.
And when he
but it's one of these times
yeah.
when they're in the woods. It's at night. They're camped, and there's this stillness and longing for something to break the silence. Like if only we heard the wind through the trees or the voice of something. I think the squire says other than our own or something like that. You know, so it's also this reflection on like a cosmic silence. But
I wish there's this connection between the knight and the actor and his family. And the knight is he's also not just looking for knowledge, but he's also looking for a meaningful act before he dies. And that's part of why he is delaying death. And he finds his meaningful act in saving this family, in helping this family and delaying death so that they can escape. But you almost wish that he and the actor would have a conversation about these things, because he's going to this young girl who's going to be burned for supposedly, having intercourse with Satan, and he's like, "Oh, have you seen the devil? Like, can you tell me about him? Like, you know, because surely he must know if God is real." And he's like seeking knowledge from her, and she can't help him, and he never asks. We never see him asking there's some reference to it, I think, even in his presence when they first meet, that he sees things, but he never asks him about like his visions or anything. So you regret that it doesn't go in that direction where he's.
Yeah.
I think that the thing with Bergman that's key to understand is, again, his relationship with women. And I mean, it comes out more strongly in A Winter Light, which is about a Swedish pastor, Pastor Eriksson, who has lost his faith, and over the course of an afternoon, sort of comes to terms with that. And it's a really, it's not a, it's not a very good film in the end, because it's sort of the dour, humorless, self-hating side of Bergman, which I just don't find very entertaining. But it does contain some really interesting metaphors, and what comes through is that women and his relationship with women, or the male character's relationship with women, stand for their views on faith. So in this case, Pastor Eriksson lost his faith pretty much at the same time as his first wife dies, whom he loves, who he clearly loved dearly, and who can't be replaced for him. And the connection is that his sort of idealized and youthful faith was lost when this woman died. And I mean, in the Seventh Seal, this comes through again, not quite as strongly, but what comes through is that he really was searching for a Marian aspect to his faith, which is clearly quite lacking from his own, Bergman's own life, and also from sort of the cinema, the film world. But where I think the importance with that this comes through in A Seventh Seal is in the fact that the wife of the wife of of Yof, the traveling player, and the interactions that they have, that they Antonius Bloch says to her something along the lines of, faith is like loving a person that you can't see, and loving a woman that you can't see. And I think that there's this key sequence at the end then when he returns to his castle and his wife is actually there.
Yeah.
And so this woman that he's been loving without seeing for 10 years is there, and she's tending the fire. And it's really quite an odd sequence to me, because it seems to me that it could be a perfect symbol for faith, like a solid faith, that this idea of loving someone that you can't see, who is actually tending the hearth, like the center of your being, your home. But it's not played that way. Whereas I think with the family that he sees, Yof and Mia, they're clearly a stand-in for the Holy Family. And I think also a stand-in for a healthy, hearty, very incarnate type of faith. Because one of the things you say, or one of the things you point out, is that the only time priests and religion really come in is in the sort of context of their power. There's no sacramental side to the religion at all, which is why it feels such a Protestant religion. And I mean, the two things that it's missing then, or the two things that I think Bergman really missed, was the sacramental, the really incarnate side of the religion, and then the feminine, the maternal side of the religion, which, I mean, in a creaturely sense, is the maternal, the incarnational, the procreative source of life raised to the supernatural level in Our Lady. So I mean, he's really searching for Mary, and I think in the Seventh Seal, it's where he comes closest to finding her, in that vision, that beatific vision of the Virgin leading the child, and then obviously with the associations with Yof and Mia, the sort of the Holy Family, who are then the only two people who escape death in this case. I mean, I think in the end, it's actually a film that validates or shows a victorious faith, even though I think the Knight in the end doesn't get it. The sort of existence of faith is validated in a way that Bergman possibly didn't even intend. And I know he talks about how he was working through his fear of death, and that in some sense the sort of the childish connection he had to his faith, that remnant is still there in A Seventh Seal, whereas it's lost in A Winter Light. But even though it is from his childhood, I don't think it's necessarily childish, because I really do think Yof and Mia demonstrate a really profound and I mean, I think deeply Catholic, since that's where we're coming from, a deeply Catholic faith.
Yeah.
Which, for me anyway, outshines all the nihilism of the rest of the sequences.
It's interesting that you mentioned the Marian aspect being missing. We do see Mary at the beginning of the film, but given that the two characters, the actor and his wife, are referring to Joseph and Mary, it's Yoff who has these visions, but there's not the corresponding side of it with Mia. Is she doesn't believe, she doesn't reject him, but she doesn't believe in his visions. So there's not the same sort of like, Mia is not as Marian as Yoff is.
No, but
Josephine.
She is devoted,
I guess.
devoted to him and loves him and follows him. And when he has the vision of death, she does trust him, and they leave together.
Yeah.
There's a very interesting book by a Catholic well, he was a Jewish convert to Catholicism and a psychoanalyst called Carl Stern. But he wrote this book, Flight from Woman, which I really recommend reading, in which he theorizes that the modern age has or is constantly in a flight from the feminine. And he psychoanalyzes a number of different writers, and he sort of psychoanalyzes phenomenological lens through them, very biographical, like Nietzsche, Descartes, Hedda Gabler for Ibsen, and things like this. And I think there's a similar reading, and the point that he's making is that most of these people were estranged from their mothers at an early age and didn't experience love from their mothers at an early age, at that point in their life when a mother's love is sort of all encompassing, when they don't see a difference between themselves and their mother, that first sort of 6 months or so. And I mean, it's interesting. Bergman talks in a documentary and later in his life about how he was quite a needy child, is roughly how he puts it, that he cried a lot and he wanted a lot of attention from his mother. But she actually rejected this to the point that she took him to a psychologist to cure him of this sort of girlish habit. And then he talks about how his mother was power hungry, that she wanted to always be involved. But when his father beat them, she wouldn't get involved. She'd stay away. So like for me, for him, he had this kind of inversion of the ideal mother who wants to be powerful when she can control things, but doesn't want to come to his protection or receive him. And I think there's definitely this idea of rejecting the receptive quality of femininity, like that feminine virtue, that, you know, the knight embodied this to a certain extent, because he's not receptive. He's very much, he wants things on his own terms. He kind of wants to conquer or to take. Like he doesn't want to just accept faith as a gift freely given from God. And I mean, that I think is what Bloch sees in the relationship between Yof and Mia. He sees their faith in each other, but I think he recognizes something unconsciously in Mia's beauty and in Yof's faith.